All right, welcome back. So I'm here, slightly ridiculous, with Soot the dog. We've had a little bit more of a chat about the week's news. Soot just asked me during the break, what stories what are you going to talk about next, Jake?
I think you might need to see someone.
Why not? I'm just very happy with it.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm sure
great,
you are,
isn't
but
he?
it's
Do you think it looks unprofessional?
is sort of saying other things, maybe about, I don't know, fire or guns or death or any other concerning subject.
No, he's lovely. Look at him. Does he look like an aggressive dog to you? No, he's lovely.
Well, they never look aggressive.
It's a black Labrador, mate. They're not going to bite you.
No, but he might whisper in your ear about horrible things, and then there'll be police investigations and things like that.
So, nothing wrong with him. Have you ever had any bad experiences with dogs?
I've never been attacked by one, but
No.
they invade my personal space in ways that I don't like.
It's horrible, isn't it? He's furious. Anyway, look, basically, both me and Soot want to talk more about the week's news. What's up next, Jake?
All right, well, we had a bill introduced to Parliament today, Wednesday, as we're recording, that basically is these slot reforms at Sydney Airport that Transport Minister Catherine King had kind of announced earlier in the year. If you'll recall, there's a number of changes to the takeoff slot system. No change to the 80-20 rule, which would sort of tighten up the amount of flights that an airline has to use its slot for. So currently, if you use your takeoff slot 80% of the time, you can keep it basically indefinitely. There's no change to that in this legislation. But there have been some transparency and accountability measures. There's the bill. Excuse me. The bill discusses things like civil penalties for slot hoarding, improving access to peak slots for new entrants and regional carriers, a recovery period at Sydney Airport, so capacity will be temporarily increased to allow more flights to take off and things to get back in the swing more quickly after disruptions from things like weather. And this is just over a month after the aviation white paper came out, which, of course, had a pretty heavy focus on consumer protections.
It's really interesting. So one of the kind of aspects of this is that there's this phrase slot hoarding, and so Qantas and Virgin will deny very strongly that they've been slot hoarding. Some of the smaller airlines accuse them of doing so, but essentially the accusation was that airlines were putting on flights they know they wouldn't necessarily use, and they would effectively kind of cancel them, or they'd be able to cancel 1 and 5, still be able to keep their flights. It was very hard to definitively prove either way because there was no transparency. If you cancelled a flight, you didn't necessarily have to say why, or it was hard to independently look at that data. Under the new rules now, if you cancel a flight, you've got to give a reason. So the idea is that makes it very hard, if it were to be the case that there was slot hoarding, for that to happen. So in theory, this will help smaller airlines if slot hoarding is actually going on, or if you're Qantas and Virgin, this allows you to vindicate yourself. This allows you to say this is not going on at all. One of the interesting things is it's tried to update the 80-20 rule, but it's not quite got rid of it. Now, one of the reasons for this is ultimately that 80-20 rule is derived from the fact, particularly at Sydney Airport, there simply isn't the capacity. Effectively, Sydney Airport is full to bursting, or at least it is for those kind of plum peak time slots. So the argument is there's only so much you can do, and the underlying problem is you simply haven't got enough airports. But nonetheless, whatever your views on this, I would say, to the government's credit, they spent a year working on the white paper. Well, it was originally the green paper, which kind of outlined a brief idea of what they were thinking. They've had industry submissions and feedback. They've published a white paper. And now very soon after that white paper was published, 6 weeks ago, we're actually seeing the machinery of government spring into action. So we're actually seeing the new government, without whatever political side you are on, do stuff, which I think is a positive thing.
Yeah, and they've already done things like there's an independent audit of the slot system going on. There's also this competitive tender process for the slot management at Sydney Airport, which at present is run by Airport Coordination Australia, which is sort of an industry run body. It has. It's owned mostly by the major airlines, though they will stress that the major airlines have no input into what they actually decide. And so the government has put that slot process out to tender. Possibly airport coordination will just succeed in the tender process and get that back. But that's sort of remains to be seen what's going to happen there.
And just before we leave this topic, talking about airport capacity, I believe in the last week we had the first. Well, not the first, because you'll tell us the technicalities, but we had maybe the second landing on Western Sydney Airport's runway. This is obviously going to be the game changer when it opens, because this is going to open up the capacity. But Jake, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so this was a week or so ago. This was October so exactly a week ago, October the 2nd, as of the time of recording. We had Western Sydney Airport, the first ever official takeoff and landing. There was this light aircraft that conducted some test flights for the airfield's ground lighting system. So it was a Piper PA-30 twin-engine Comanche. VH8MN. The rego number was the very devil to track down.
But we did track it down.
We did track it down.
For people that moan, they didn't tell us this. We had to find it out. Go on.
But they basically had this plane take off and land at both ends of the runway in daylight, dusk, and nighttime conditions. And that was all to make sure that these 3,000 lights were fit for purpose ahead of the opening in 2026.
But it does. One of the interesting things that Simon Hickey, the CEO, said is that we're now kind of moving from the building phase into the testing phase. So they are still building Western Sydney Airport, but it's kind of basically done. You know, they're probably painting the walls and putting down the tiles. I'm simplifying it, but it's basically there. So now they're in a position with about a year to go where they are doing, you know, these kind of tests. So this was almost the first test that we're going to get. I would imagine in 6 months or so, we are going to get, I say a proper aircraft, but you're going to have the first landing of a major aircraft come down. You're going to have, you know, all the baggage carousels put under pressure. So this is going to be really ramping it up now. One of the interesting things is that obviously over the last few years, the question has been, will it open on time? All the signs point to it actually being ready by the end of next year.
Yeah, it's looking good. And as you say, Adam, that wasn't actually the first plane ever to land at Western Sydney Airport. Technically speaking, not the first plane ever to land at Western Sydney Airport. Back in late 2020, there was a Piper PA-28 Cherokee that made an emergency landing on the earthworks at the construction site, reportedly a mechanical problem on a training flight. So this was the first official takeoff and landing at Western Sydney Airport.
So that person would have a kind of not emergency landed, but landed there. That person has inadvertently taken that record now.
Yeah. Exactly. It puts you a bit in mind of the Sydney Harbour Bridge opening, Adam, where that bloke on horseback came along and cut the ribbon with the sabre before the governor could do it.
Did that actually happen?
That did. It was a bloke called De Groot, I believe, when they were opening the Sydney Harbour Bridge. They were having a big ceremony. The ribbon was getting ready to be cut, and he rides up on the back of his horse, slashes it with his sabre, and rides off.
What a legend.
And I think they had to tie the ribbon back together so the government could cut it properly.
Well, there you go. All sorts of transport-related trivia. You want infrastructure trivia? We're the home for that. Right, what are we going to talk about next, Jake? What's it going to listen to?
Oh, there's probably some good news out of Vanuatu that we should cover. We recall that over the past few months, Air Vanuatu has been in voluntary liquidation, which is the term that they use over there. But there has now been a deed of compromise, which has been approved by Vanuatu Supreme Court, and so the administration is set to end. All the shares will be turned over to this new sort of government-owned entity, AV3. The airline handed back to management, and Air Vanuatu will sort of begin ramping up domestic flights again. It's been doing some limited charter flights, but now it's set to be returned to its management.
So this is like administration or liquidation, but really administration done right. They've gone in there, got the job done.
Yep,
out they go. It's all back to normal.
Yeah, they've sort of restructured the business. Unfortunately, they did axe about 170 jobs in the process, which is obviously not great for those people. But they have reorganized, recapitalized, and they're getting ready to end this voluntary liquidation. No news yet, though, on when these international flights will resume. I don't know what's going on with their 737-800, which is their only jet aircraft, and that was the one that was doing their international flights. So what happens with that remains to be seen, because it has been grounded and in maintenance since, I think, January. So it's been a while. They've they were sort of contracting and wet leasing flights out to other airlines before that. But sort of a changed aviation landscape in Vanuatu over there, because now Virgin has sort of moved in to increase its capacity. Qantas and Jetstar have sort of pounced on that route as well. You've got Air Solomons or Solomon Airlines. They're now doing the route that they used to be doing, basically on wet lease for Air Vanuatu, Brisbane to Santo in Vanuatu's north. So Air Vanuatu, once it does resume international flights, is actually going to be competing a lot more with other airlines than it did beforehand. Because beforehand it was Air Vanuatu was code sharing with Qantas. Remains to be seen whether that code share agreement will continue once Air Vanuatu gets back up and running in its own right. If it does, considering that Qantas and Jetstar are now flying that route itself.